opportunity for discussion, an opportunity for some discussion, questions and answers. So along the way, I encourage everyone to keep track of the questions that get stimulated by the information that our presenters offer so that we can follow up in that discussion period. And we will then also have a moment of a review of what that October workshop and the October workshop agenda looks like. Our intent is to have the presentations run from now until about 2:20, so about 70 minutes worth of conversation. We'll have a discussion period for 15 or 20 minutes. We'll talk about the workshop agenda, and then we'll adjourn by 2:45. That's the intent. So we'll try to stick with that as the flight plan. I should also note that another teammate, Aaron Spry, is piloting the WebEx. So thanks, Aaron, for doing the really important work of flying this plane well. So as they say on the airplanes, put your seatbelts on just in case we run into unanticipated rough air. Otherwise, I think we should get ready to take off. So flight crew, get ready for the plane to take off. We're going to hear first from Allison on the state revolving funding program. Then we'll hear from Sean on the state revolving fund program support. We'll hear from Joseph on 604B funding, Jerry on IRA and climate smart commodities, and Ellen on water infrastructure and resiliency finance center. So without further ado, we've been cleared for takeoff. Allison, would you be ready to slip in and start talking about the state revolving fund? Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction and for the invitation to talk today. Let me just share my presentation, shop sharing content. Oh, I can just let you know when to click through. Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So I'll be giving a brief overview today of the EPA's state revolving funds. I'll give a brief refresher on both the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds, as well as bipartisan infrastructure law funding that has provided a large influx of money into both of our programs that we're really excited about. So the first slide, I figured I would just give a general overview of the program from the national level. So the state revolving funds from EPA are federal state partnerships to protect public health and the environment, providing low cost financing for much needed water infrastructure. And we'll get into a little bit later what types of water infrastructure we can fund, but it's not just the traditional pipe and plant that most folks might think of when they think of these type of programs. So the revolving fund creating a perpetual source of financing from loans that are going out each year from the 51 state programs. Those programs are capitalized each year by an EPA capitalization grant that the state then provides a 20% match. These funds are state implemented and operated based on the priorities of the state and working within EPA requirements and guidelines. And the states do apply for their capitalization grants through the SRF each year. So another important point is that there is availability of special financing term for disadvantaged communities to help address equity and affordability for these programs. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a coming slide. So the state revolving funds are basically 51 infrastructure banks providing a plethora of different assistance options shown here on this screen for low-cost water quality improvement projects. The SRFs offer at or below market interest rate loans Terms of up to 30 years, I believe it's 40 for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. State Revolving Fund can offer to buy or refinance local debt. We've recently seen some cases where nonprofits or organizations will come in for a guarantee or purchase of bond insurance to then be able to borrow money with the same rating as the SRFs. And then additional subsidization, I'll talk about a little bit when we get to the bill funding, the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. But additional subsidization, what we call it, is basically grant-like money. It either reduces partially the amount of the loan principal that you are receiving for the project, or can actually wipe out the principal forgiveness that's necessary, essentially making it a grant. So I've already kind of mentioned the benefits on the next slide for the SRF. Interest is typically charged at half the market rate for these loans for water infrastructure projects, with the potential availability of additional subsidy, these grant-like loans that I just talked about, and we'll talk about a little bit later about how they're expanding by a lot in the bill legislation. So there are extended term loans up to 30 years or 40% for drinking water, which can make repayments a bit more easy to manage over that time. And repayments begin up to 12 months after construction completion on a invoice basis. So we serve a diversity of communities, all sizes and economic status, wide range of project dollar sizes. In 22, the smallest SRF loan was for $2,300, while the largest was for $666 million to New York City to do pipe and plant rehab and construction. Another benefit of SRF loans is that once these loans are repaid back into the pot, they are essentially relinquished of a lot of their federal obligations. So that funding that can then be used to match other programs like 319 grants, FEMA, WIFIA funding. So some other water quality funding that might be available for ag sector projects. So the next slide is just kind of introducing the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which is the team that I work on and specifically does a lot more funding for agricultural BMPs and conservation and non-point source pollution reduction / nature-based solutions. There's a large amount that we can do within those eligibilities in the states. So the next slide is just kind of a graphic of how the state revolving funds work in each state. So each state is applying for a CAP grant that seed money each year that is then provided by EPA and a 20% match at the state level. Going into that pot in the middle there, they may leverage and go to the bond market, that's the bottom left, to increase what they are able to put out. So then that pot is loaned out and provided with some of the other assistance types to water quality improvement projects. And then these loans are repaid back into the fund. So it's a perpetual source of funding for these projects. The next slide is, I think, probably pretty relevant to this group. It's who can come in for money and for what types of projects. And again, this will vary state by state because the programs are administered and managed separately in each state within our federal guidelines. So sometimes there will be statutory or legal barriers within a state that might prevent them from taking advantage of our full federal eligible entities or eligible project categories. So for instance, on this slide, I mentioned some states don't fund private systems or private entities. So, for instance, in a state that might not be able to fund farmers, there are mechanisms that the state programs have come up with to work around that, and create programs that do like pass through or special structures to help these loans go through. So, in general, municipalities, state agencies, sometimes nonprofits, private groups, watershed groups, community groups, homeowners associations come in for SRF loans, but it does depend on the state. And then the project categories listed out here are just kind of basically pulled from our website. Relevant here would be agricultural best management practices, BMPs, habitat and ecosystem restoration and source water protection. There's probably a few options here that could be utilized by the ag community. Like we've seen like purchase of cover crop equipment, no-till equipment, really innovative uses of the SRF for supporting nutrient reduction and water quality improvement in agricultural areas. So one thing that I do want to mention again is that SRF assistance cannot be provided for operations and maintenance or routine ambient water quality monitoring. But this page just gives kind of an idea of eligible agricultural best management practice activities for the SRFs, including cropland and animal feeding operations. So the next slide is kind of who has the legal authority to apply for funding, but how do you find that out for your state, since every state might be different? So an intended use plan is a document developed by each state each year describing how they're going to use their SRF program and expects to use the funds over the course of the fiscal year. So these are yearly documents spelling out their program goals and operations, describing how the SRF funds will be used, and how they will demonstrate compliance with CWSRF regulations to EPA and the public. This is a great place to go on your relevant state EPA's, relevant state SRF's website to look up their intended use plan for the current year and see a ranked list of projects that applied for that year, also known as the project priority list, and a list of their goals and operations. It might even be pertinent just to do a Control F and put in agriculture if that's what you're looking for, or kind of like take a step back and see what are they doing for like non-point source projects. So that's a really great place to start on each state's website. And then just the next slide, I had some resources that we provide from the EPA level that I thought would be relevant to this group. We have a fact sheet on funding agricultural best management practices that includes a rundown of pretty much what I've talked over the last few slides, and then it gives a few case studies where the Clean Water SRF has been used to finance farms or ag BMP loan programs at the state level that then gets the financing to those farmers. There's a lot of stuff going on in different states, addressing different barriers, different ways. So the resource in the middle here is financing options for non-traditional eligibilities in the SRF. So this will help address questions like, well, you're coming in for a loan, we need to have a repayment source. We might not have that. So there's different creative options that we have found in talking to states within this guide, as well as different programs that states have used to finance ag. And then lastly, this CWSRF best practices guide was developed to share the collective wisdom from some of the states that we've talked to and provide case studies of successful partnerships between state programs to finance non-point source solutions, including ag BMP and a runoff reduction. So we're hoping this guide will help state staff better align and integrate different entities, including the Clean Water SRF and 319 NPS pollution management programs, to hopefully use that as the partnership to move forward for these types of activities at the state level and make sure everyone's kind of speaking the same language and lining up their goals. Since we both are kind of at the same, looking at the same goal with much different amounts of pots of money. So I think really quickly, next I could go over the bipartisan infrastructure law.
We just have 1 minute left.
1 minute left, okay. So bipartisan infrastructure law, I can go over this quickly. The historic investment under the Biden administration that includes $50 billion to the EPA. That will mostly be funded through our existing Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund programs. The next slide gives a rundown of how much will go to each program. So in addition to the base SRF programs, there will be this bipartisan infrastructure law money available. For instance, over 5 years, the Clean Water SRF has an additional $12.7 billion available in the capitalization grants that go out to states. Of that money, 49% of that will have to go towards principal forgiveness for disadvantaged communities or sustainable projects. So it's an opportunity for states to target their priorities, and also for folks to kind of reach out to their states and see what they're doing with that money. See if you're possibly working by or with a disadvantaged community. Maybe you could get this subsidy then and actually get some projects going that might otherwise not happen. So 49% bill. So that was just a quick rundown of our program. I'm sure Quantified Ventures Sean will give a more into what's going on in the Mississippi River Basin. But I have my contact information on my last slide. If anyone has any more questions, I'm happy to answer any emails or calls. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison. That was a great presentation. Very information rich. So everybody jot down questions if they haven't already on Allison's talk, and perhaps we'll be able to answer those in the discussion session. Thanks again for that. Let's shift now to Sean O'Rourke to talk about support for the State Revolving Fund program in the Mississippi River Basin. Thanks, Sean. Take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, UMRBA, for the opportunity to join you all today. Sean O'Rourke, Director on the Water, Climate, and Finance team at Quantified Ventures. I'm actually based in Vermont, but we have a local colleague, Becca Truman, who is the Mississippi River Watershed Coordinator, and I think she's met with many of you on the line, and she's really embedded. She's based in Louisville, Kentucky, and is really embedded in a lot of the things that are happening and the issues that are related to the Mississippi River Basin. While based in Vermont, I oversee our national approach to the watershed coordinator work, which I'll explain in a minute. But Allison gave a really kind of in-depth overview of what the state revolving funds are and how we think that they could be the generational investment mechanism for accelerating nature-based solutions, not only in the Mississippi River, but all across the country. And I think what was really came through loud and clear is the time is now. Now is the moment for us to be accelerating these projects and in partnerships with many of you on the ground. Quantified Ventures, I'm going to step back for 1 second to kind of frame who we are at Quantified Ventures. We're a company full of problem solvers. We work on the biggest environment and health related issues around the country, focused on challenges and a passion for working with local communities. We develop outcomes-based solutions through policy and financing related approaches. While we work across multiple sectors, the most appropriate range of work that we'll be talking about here is our watershed coordinator team, which really grew out of this opportunity and need that we were seeing around the country of historic amounts of money coming from the federal government to communities, to states for environment and resilience related projects. But many of the pipelines of projects were not fully identified or built. And oftentimes, if there were projects, the local communities didn't necessarily have the resources, capacity, or ability to go after that funding. Who owns that money? What is this SRF program that you mentioned? Where does all the funding come from? How do I even access it? It's a loan? What does that mean for me? I've always gone after grants. And so we have identified that there's a need for a technical assistance role in a lot of the priority watersheds around the country to be the wind at the back of local watershed and conservation organizations to help to be able to push these projects forward to take advantage of this amount of money that's coming out of the federal government right now. A lot of the funding that has traditionally come out of the government for water-based infrastructure has been for pipes and pumps. And we think that the time is now to be weaving in nature-based solutions and green infrastructure projects as true infrastructure as we think about what we need to do to clean up our water streams, receiving water bodies all across the country, and recognize there's a lot of really good work that is already happening in the Mississippi. And we are completely focused on nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure and green infrastructure as an approach to meeting water quality improvement standards, as well as quality of life benefits. I put up this slide here because we use a lot of terms interchangeably. You'll hear nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure, natural infrastructure. We're looking at all of the solutions that are on this slide here, and many of the opportunities that Allison mentioned through the State Revolving Fund program can actually fund these types of projects. Historically, it has not gone to these types of projects, and I'll show a couple stats in a minute. But we're trying to really push on and stress test these projects that are on this slide here. And I know that many of you on the line and your organizations are pushing on these projects, and we want to see how we can potentially support at no cost. We're fully funded to provide that direct on the ground assistance to get your projects done better, faster, and cheaper. The opportunity for natural infrastructure, as Allison mentioned, and I mentioned a couple times, is now. The state revolving funds are one financing mechanism. We think they are the largest mechanism for being able to provide this funding for natural infrastructure projects. But only 4% of the money over the last 30 plus years in the SRF programs has gone to non-point source projects or green infrastructure projects. And the opportunity is, as Allison mentioned now, $55+ billion going to water infrastructure and 44+ billion. It's always interesting to now say B with a billion when we were all focused on such smaller amounts of money over the last 15, 20 years. Must be going directly to the SRFs, and 49% of that having to be given away as free or principal forgiveness is a real key opportunity. And we're working with communities and organizations, municipalities, utilities, and trying to find ways to strategically access those 49% free dollars as a way of accelerating your projects and looking at grant funding as well as financing related solutions. We also think that watershed groups are the best friend for utilities and municipalities. Watershed groups and conservation organizations have the real pulse of what's happening on the ground, what conservation related work, agricultural BMPs are happening, and they can be a pipeline builder for a lot of the utilities who are the traditional borrowers through the state SRF programs and traditional grant recipients through other federal grants. And so we're trying to bridge those gaps right now between utilities, municipalities, and the local conservation and watershed organizations. So any ideas that are starting to bubble up about, I've got a project, I just don't know where it lives or how to get funding for it, we can kind of help start making those critical connections. There's also billions of dollars available beyond the SRF. Our fully funded work to work with communities around the country started with SRF at the core, and trying to find ways to develop those pathways to SRF funding. But now we have identified other funding sources to really assist communities and watershed and organizations access the grant programs that are coming out of many of the organizations on this slide here. Regional resilience challenges that are coming out of NOAA, the EPA, additionally, environmental justice grants, multiple NOFOs are going to be dropping this fall. Department of Transportation, their Protect allocation to work on increasing resiliency along the right-of-ways on state roads around the country. And then the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and working with NIFWIF, we see as a really critical partner in weaving the intersection of habitat, environment, and related benefits, as well as community resilience. And there's been a number of new funding opportunities that have come out, and we're excited to be supporting multiple organizations nationally. So these things are dropping daily, it seems like, but they're oftentimes complicated, hard to access. Applications take a long time. They're encouraging large projects, which a lot of these types of projects that we're talking about have historically been smaller, always grant funded. If you have a project, give us a call and we can kind of help use our national expertise to try and leverage some limited local resources to be able to push these projects forward. As we've been working around the country and around the Mississippi, as Becca's been kind of touring all around the Mississippi, we've heard a bunch of things that are really, I think, encouraging us to continue this work and to deepen it and broaden it in multiple ways. We need to develop that pipeline. For too long, the approach has been, oh, there's some funding out there, just give me some project. We need to flip that script to include, we have a really robust pipeline of projects. Let's tailor those opportunities to the funding that's coming out, and then we can write the opportunity to the test. That's what we're trying to do, not only in Mississippi, but nationally. Repayment stream identification. If we talk about the SRF, they're loans. They need to be repaid. Below market rate loans, and oftentimes there's principal forgiveness, which is terrific, but there needs to be a repayment stream, and different from, say, traditional water projects like sewer line or pump projects, which have traditional user rates built in. Many of the natural infrastructure projects just don't have that built-in repayment stream. And so we're trying to look for new and innovative ways to provide that repayment so we can accelerate projects. And then finally, help communicating, working with the state SRF and funding sources is just really critical. How do we talk to these state staffs? Who's the key staff to actually are making decisions, building the project priority lists, putting together the intended use plans, and how do you advocate for more nature-based solution projects to be included in the priority funding state by state? And so these are the three key areas that we keep hearing over and over and over again, but we're excited about where this can go. What can we do in partnership with all of you? And we're tailoring this and building this every day. The financial expertise I mentioned, building those repayment streams, capital stack, the real technical financing part of this work is critical, and we'd love to play that role with you. Identifying projects. Looking for local support, readiness to proceed. Not always projects are shovel ready. How can we find the pre-development dollars to be able to get your projects to that all important 30% design? And helping to administer your projects, looking at project outcomes, grant writing, proposal support, stakeholder collaboration. We can bring examples to the table and kind of help streamline what many of these funders are really looking for. And then finally, demonstrate demand. This really important approach of kind of show me, don't tell me is really critical. We hear over and over and over again, and speaking with many state and community leaders, that they're like, okay, well, how much money do you need? Where are the key roles that we can play? And a lot of times the answer has been, no, there's a lot of need, just believe me. And we're trying to take that believe me out of the equation, remove the hypothetical, and really start to be able to develop a really strong and robust pipeline of projects that we can really stand behind. And we're hoping to do that in partnership with all of you.
I have about 3 minutes left, Sean.
Okay, I think I just lost my slides.
Sorry about that. Looks like Aaron may have lost.
There we go. I think they just popped up. I can zoom forward here.
Oh, you got, okay.
Yep, I'm back.
Go ahead.
Great. And then they'll keeps jumping away. There we go. And then the last slide here is our key outcomes that we're driving towards. Demonstrated demand, as I mentioned. We want to draw more attention to nature-based solutions and elevate these projects as infrastructure. create new and stronger partnerships all across the Mississippi River. We have found that this work takes a village, and many of these grant programs are now encouraging regional partnerships and collaborations, and we're trying to develop that. And sorry, I lost the slides again. But I'll wrap up in saying kind of the big picture takeaway that I want to deliver here is don't wait for any projects that you kind of have at your fingertips. Give us a call. We're excited to work with all of you and have been really impressed by the work that's happening in the Mississippi River and looking forward to push this forward. So I'll wrap it up there, Brian, and turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean, for a very energetic and information-rich presentation. Also, you managed the unexpected rough air very well. So thank you for that. That was good. Everybody's seatbelt is on. We're good. Not too many spills. So a tremendous amount of information. And thank you for your organization's good work in supporting this effort. Next, let's, again, everybody take notes, questions, save them for the discussion session for Sean. We'll shift over to Joseph. You'll give us a sense of 604B funding. Over to you, Joseph.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today and share with you a little bit about the Clean Water Act 604B program. I will jump right in, and I guess I can start by thanking Allison and the rest of the Clean Water SRF team for giving us 1% of their funding, because ultimately that is where the 604B funding comes from. Can you just tell me how to advance? I'm sorry.
No problem. There's arrows above. If you have any issues, though, I'll advance for you. Like directly above your presentation.
Okay, yeah, for some reason I'm not seeing them. I apologize. I can just say
Do you mind just cueing me then? Yep.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Lauren. So as I mentioned, under Section 604B of the Clean Water Act, each state is required to reserve 1% of their Clean Water State Revolving Fund capitalization grants and set that aside for water quality management planning activities to carry out activities that are listed in 205 and 303 of the Clean Water Act. So the non-point source management branch where I live has historically been responsible for administering the 604B program at a national level. And there have been brief periods where there's been upticks in 604B funding. The last notable one was back in 2011-ish. And that was the time when we had the infusion of funding from the America Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So it's been a while since the program's seen the increases it's seeing under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So that's why we're excited to talk about this little small but mighty program that can provide support for a wide range of activities. So the 604B program isn't tied to any one particular Clean Water Act program area, but instead can touch several. So the only sort of overarching requirement for the program is that the funds must be used for planning or planning related activities. But beyond that, you can see a wide range of eligible activities here, including ambient monitoring, water quality standards development, putting together those lists of 303D impaired waters, total maximum daily loads. And the funds can also pay for things like program administration, so staff salaries and contracts. And of course, it can support administration of non-point source program implementation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we saw quite an infusion of funding into the program between FY22 and 26, thanks to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So it's approximately $127 million in additional funding will go into the 604B coffers. And as a result of that infusion, we, as a program, developed interim implementation guidelines. Last summer, we released those guidelines to essentially guide states in their administration of their water quality management planning programs and build on some of the previous historic guidelines. And in addition to outlining some general program responsibilities and Bipartisan Infrastructure Law specific responsibilities, we also articulated In those guidelines, we encourage states to consider using a portion of the additional funding provided under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to conduct activities that are related to climate and equity, so to weave those activities into their planning programs, and that could play out, again, in several different Clean Water Act program areas. So as a first stage, we asked states to conduct an assessment of the extent to which climate and equity were integrated or could be integrated into their water quality management planning programs, and then identify discrete activities to fund with future years' grants. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here in fairly small print, I wanted to provide all of the states' allotments for FY23 to give you a sense of the wide range of funding available depending on what state you're in. So some of the larger states, thanks to the infusion from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, will receive in the millions of dollars in FY23, while other states and territories receive something around the statutory minimum, which is $100,000. So obviously that's quite a bit of disparity, and depending on the amount of funding a particular state gets, that will have tremendous bearing on what they focus those funds towards. So one of the ways we've heard some states describe 604B programs is that it can be kind of a bit of a patch kit, filling in gaps in various administration-related aspects of their Clean Water Act water quality management and planning programs generally. So again, thinking about all these different programs that could potentially be implicated, from water quality standards to the 319 program to total maximum daily loads. Some states will target these 604B funds as sort of supplemental or complementary funds to ensure that critical work can happen. Other states that have funding to go beyond those sort of base needs participate in a wide range of planning activities. And I'll touch on that a little bit more, the sorts of things we've seen funded in the past. But I just wanted to emphasize that because this is a sort of a non-discretionary program in that states they get the funding, and then they, in some cases, will go out with RFAs and solicit projects from subawardees. One of the things that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, and I kind of glossed over on the first slide, but is that the 604B program has a requirement for a pass-through amount. So the statute requires that at least 40% of the funds are distributed to what are called regional public comprehensive planning organizations or appropriate interstate organizations. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in terms of how these funds could potentially touch the areas that you work in the upper Mississippi River Basin. Next slide, please. Okay, and as I mentioned, here's a little bit more of a breakout to give you a sense of how the funds have historically been used. I will note that these figures here are based on a random selection of 21 states and look specifically at work plans from fiscal year 17 and 20. But here you can see on the left, the pie chart shows that the bulk of funds are used for a general category of water quality planning, and that can include all sorts of things like development of watershed-based plans or just other activities that support and inform the administration and implementation of those several Clean Water Act programs I mentioned earlier. You can see there's a pretty good chunk actually used on ambient monitoring, about 22% of the work plans that we reviewed for this analysis, and then outreach and technical assistance, with smaller amounts going to program administration and water quality standards related activities. And then on the right, I wanted to include this to give you a flavor of sort of how much trickles down to non-point source. So it is a pretty big category. We kind of see an equal split, at least in this sample, of non-point source and point source focused activities. And then on the bottom in green, you can see about 4% of the funding went towards non-point source agriculture specifically. So again, it doesn't really speak to what the funds are going towards. And as I mentioned, 604B grants would never be funding direct implementation of best management practices, but things that would support implementation of those practices. Next slide, please. So in FY22, states developed their work plans and negotiated those with the regions, and ultimately the regions made awards to states. The way this program works out is the awards are made at the regional level to the states. One of the things we noticed is that we were all excited about the infusion of cash we got from bipartisan infrastructure law, but then there were some congressional community project funding set-asides that reduced the base allotments for 604B by about 25%. So essentially, if you think about the Clean Water Act as, you know, this big pot of money, now there's several pots of Clean Water Act money that includes the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, and 604B is 1% of that. So there has always been this historic or this regular or base 604B allotment, but now there's, you know, three pots of funding essentially feeding, or three appropriations feeding that allotment. So when that base allotment went down, it took away some of the opportunities the states would have had to use those additional bill funding to do additional work. They kind of had to use some of the bill funding to just get themselves back to a level. So even with that cut, though, there was about an 82% increase from pre-bipartisan infrastructure law levels. In FY22, we saw about 53% of states identify climate related activities that they would implement in future years using funding from 23 to 26. And in addition to the sort of general program funds that states are using, EPA headquarters did make available a modest amount of technical support to assist states in their implementation of the programs. So next slide, please, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So here I've listed some technical assistance projects. These were projects that were funded by EPA headquarters contractor support. And you can see, you know, nothing directly touching agriculture, but what I will say is that, you know, the way we structure our technical assistance contracts is pretty much that we can support activities in certain discrete buckets of, you know, work or technical areas. So things like geospatial analyses, modeling, actually convening stakeholders, bringing people together, developing and delivering trainings. So those sorts of general areas of technical assistance can lead to a lot of interesting work, and a lot of states here were looking at different ways they could better integrate some climate or equity considerations into their planning programs. And you know, you can kind of think about it as, depending on what the state's priorities are for 604B, they could be using the funding for one very specific Clean Water Act program area, or multiple Clean Water Act program areas, or water quality management and planning more generally. So thinking about how it complements the 106 program, for example, to conduct monitoring. But either way, I wanted to just show those projects to show the general category of activities. And even though ag wasn't included in this past go around in FY22, there's nothing stopping states from using 604B funds to target ag non-point source or even point source related issues in a planning context. Next slide, please. So for FY23 and beyond, we saw a further cut because of congressional set-asides. But fortunately, the way the bipartisan infrastructure law was written, the appropriations for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund go up from 22 to 25 and then plateau at its highest levels in 25 and 26. So the base allotment again went down for states, but the bipartisan infrastructure law fraction of that went up. So again, states stayed basically at about 82-ish% greater than pre-bipartisan infrastructure law levels. And we are continuing to provide technical assistance to states from FY23 to 25 as they implement their programs. And I did want to note here, even though this isn't directly related to 604B, that third bullet, we are providing at the headquarters level another technical assistance opportunity that will essentially allow states to submit proposals for technical assistance in the areas of increasing equity in their non-point source program administrations, linking natural hazard mitigation to non-point source pollution, as well as thinking about implementing agriculture-related non-point source measures. So we think about
3 minutes left.
Thank you kindly.
3 minutes left.
Appreciate it. We think about those programs as complementing each other, and there is some potential for overlap. So oftentimes we will see some of the same activities happening in states' water quality management planning activities as states might be kind of undertaking in their general non-point source implementation programs. So one of the things we want to do for 23 and beyond is deepen collaboration with the other Clean Water Act program areas. Think about the different ways we can advance goals around things like TMDLs, water quality standards. Again, because of some of the congressional set-aside cuts and the fact that some states don't receive a whole lot of funding, around 150,000, even with the bipartisan infrastructure law. Like I said, in some cases, there's limitations on how much new work a state can do. But to the extent that states are able to devote some of these 604B funds to new focus areas across those Clean Water Act programs, we aim to support that the best we can. And then, of course, we want to document and share state successes as much as possible. Next slide, please. So the way the 604B program works, as I mentioned, is that states essentially get grants and then make decisions about the pass-through funds, the 40% requirement pass-through, as well as what to do with the other 60%. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is talk to state water quality agencies who work on 604B and find out about their priorities for that funding. Next, I would encourage you all to share ideas with us at EPA and the states about how climate inequity and environmental justice goals could be better woven into agricultural planning activities. And sort of alongside that first bullet, I would encourage you to think about having conversations with your states about whether or not there is any potential for some of those 40% required pass-through funds to come to organizations that you're associated with. So I just want to kind of finish on this note is the way the Clean Water Act's written, there isn't exactly a definition of what constitutes a regional public comprehensive planning organization or an appropriate interstate organization, just that it's some organization outside of the state. And our stance at headquarters has been that the EPA regions are in the best position to work with states to determine whether or not an organization is potentially an appropriate organization to satisfy that 40% pass-through requirement. And then the additional 60% of the funding, like I mentioned, can potentially be subgranted by states should they decide to go that route. So there are potential opportunities to get involved, certainly opportunities for 604B to touch agriculture, and glad to answer any questions you have during the allotted time or any time in the future. So thank you for asking us to share about our program today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joseph. Again, another very information-enriched presentation. Thanks for putting it together and offering it today. And write down any questions you have for Joseph, and we'll pick them up in the discussion session. So thanks again, Joseph. We'll now hear from Jerry on the IRA and climate smart commodities. Jerry.
Right. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Jerry Rayner. I am the Financial Assistance Program Director with NRCS. It's great to have this opportunity to speak with you today about the Inflation Reduction Act and the Climate Smart Commodities partnerships that we have that we're working through with the agency. And then how all of these opportunities fit with our existing programs and services that we provide to our working farms, ranches, and the private lands across the country. If you don't mind advancing the slides, I do not have that option.
No problem, just cue me.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Want to share with you the opportunity with IRA. IRA representing the single largest investment in climate and clean energy in American history, and as well as our agency taking those aggressive actions for any climate crisis. This is unprecedented funding. It's one of those things we've been asking for. Wish we had more funding. Wish we had more funding to address some of the concerns across the landscape. And the investment of $19.5 billion showed up starting FY23. So with that, we have approximately 4 to 5 years to implement our conservation programs utilizing this level of funding. This funding does have an expiration date of 2030, but instead of having that almost 7-year period, we're only looking at 4 to 5 because our programs have a tell-off period based on how our contracts are structured. Our core programs within the agency, and most of you will hear these acronyms of EQIP, CSP, RCPP, ASEP, CTA. I wanted to share those titles with you, so when you're hearing those acronyms, you'll know exactly which programs. EQIP is our what we consider our conservation flagship program. Typically, we've been working on landscapes that to help correct conservation issues and concerns on the landscape. CSP is a stewardship program. Once we're at the point on your operation of having those concerns addressed, then what's the next level? How do we enhance what you're currently doing on the operation? And this program is established to do that. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program, we are delivering EQIP CSP through partnership efforts, as well as our Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. That also fits into RCPP because these are partners that we have, we're working with to deliver conservation. Still, all of these are voluntary efforts. CTA, our big program, our primary program, that allows us to walk the landscape, do all of the conservation planning, and provide that level of service, regardless of whether a participant decides to participate in a federal program. These are our boots on the ground that are actually working with landowners and providing those assessments. Next slide, please. So with IRA, I want to share with you the investment. Here's the level of funding. That $19.5 billion has been broken out over a 4-year structure for us. And FY23, I'll share with you in a moment how we are delivering upon that. But our funding level increases substantially up to FY26. Now, keep in mind, the Inflation Reduction Act provided $19.5 billion, and that is in addition to our current mandatory Farm Bill program. So with the level, looking at FY23, to kind of put that in perspective, essentially FY23 is in some cases, it almost doubled what we had, what we were providing within a program through the Farm Bill, but it's about a quarter of what we've been delivering. FY24 is going to get more to closer in 25 to doubling what we deliver every year within a program. So you can see the amount of work that's going to, this funding is going to generate. And so it's also, you'll see why partnerships in a minute will be so important to the agency accomplishing the mission of meeting our IRA goals as well as our Farm Bill goals as well. Next slide. So in order to meet those IRA requirements, there's a focus of mitigation. So when we're talking climate smart for IRA within NRCS, we have a focus on climate change mitigation. And the list there, although it's small, and we can provide that as well as you can find that on our website. We already had a list of climate smart practices that we implement through our conservation programs that I shared with you earlier. So what we've done is looked at that list, and we are actually expanding that list and adding additional practices that will fit within that window of mitigation. There are some of these activities that we currently have data to support all mitigation efforts, but there's certain conservation practices that we are still working to gather the scientific data to prove that what are the mitigating benefits of all of the conservation practices. So while we started off with a smaller list going into FY24, we are expanding that list tremendously. There's data that we've gathered from conservation partners, from universities that support those conservation practices being added to the list. Next slide. So implementation. I mentioned to you earlier the implementation of our on our FY23. This is as of August 28th. I know we're a few weeks past that. We are working to close out the year and get all of our contracts in place. But as of this date here, nearly 13,000 applications, and that's just within our 3 core programs of easement, stewardship, and incentive program. We also received about 163 proposals for our RCPP program. That notice of funding closed in August. And with those 163 proposals, and from the previous slide, you're looking at about $500 million we're looking at putting into partnership proposals. Those 163 proposals result in $2.2 billion in requests. So now we're actually working through the process of narrowing that list down to support the $500 million that's available, and also working to see if we have the opportunity to reach even further down that list with our FY24 funding. But as of that date, we are equipped. As you can see, the program listed first, 80% obligated of funding, CSP 61% obligated of funding, and looking at nearly 100% funding for our easement program. So a lot of work in front of us, but we're making it happen. The OTF for CIG, Conservation Innovative Grant Opportunities, that was released the 1st of September, and there's $25 million available from the Inflation Reduction Act for conservation innovative grants and with on-farm trials. Those are working on the landscape, putting these conservation practices, not our current practices, maybe new innovative technology that we're looking at implementing, putting it on the landscape, testing it, getting the results to hopefully add and incorporate into our existing program structure. Next slide, please. Now with IRA, I just wanted to kind of share with you the impacts. Here's what we see with the additional funding, the impacts of IRA funding. It allows us to have the intentional focus on climate mitigating conservation, utilizing our conservation practices, but the practice list we currently have, but having that direct focus on those that will mitigate those climate crises that we're seeing. This funding allows us to continue the research of greenhouse gas mitigation. Things that are innovative that we don't have scientific results on, part of this funding will allow for partners to gather and complete research for determining amounts, totals, and what type of process is used to quantify greenhouse gases. Expand conservation participation in federal programs. With this intentional focus on climate mitigating practices on landscape, it also allows us to offset our Farm Bill program. So then we can have a more intentional focus on conservation customers, whether it be newer beginning farmers, whether it's not historically underserved or small or limiting resource operations. It allows us to move into some different areas there. Increase conservation efforts in new technology, especially with our Conservation Innovative Grant Program. But then develop new and enhance conservation partnerships across the landscape there. Next slide, please. Now, again, as of August, you'll see where we are, how much money has been allocated as far as what was available, and then the total demand. And demand is always outpacing what we have on hand. So as we move through in those additional years, we're hoping that we know we're going to have enough demand to actually utilize all of that funding. I mentioned the $2.2 billion in requests from both Farm Bill and IRA funding with RCPP. That's a tremendous effort that's going to allow our partners to be key in delivering the conservation programs for our agency. Next slide. I want to shift gears here and talk about the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. First, this was not a program that, while we were going to be involved as far as NRCS, this is a Department of Agriculture program that we are heavily involved with, and it's through partnerships. These are grant opportunities, and the slide is basically what's the importance here. Everything I share with you through IRA or our Farm Bill programs, partners are going to be key in how we deliver that. What was noticed is the strong and growing interest from the private sector, looking for climate smart produce and products and services, and agriculture is right there in that market to provide to look at the opportunity when it comes to expanding the market for that. So as companies are looking for operations or producers or our food and fiber to be grown in a more climate friendly way, these are the opportunities for partners to say we have a place in the market area and we can help you deliver. The second bullet, where it seeks to build and expand market opportunities, again, America being one of those global leaders when it comes to climate smart agriculture production and our products and our services. This is key. This is key. The agencies don't always know where these market opportunities are, but our partners are fully engaged in that. Again, being that key element. And then the last bullet, one of the things I want to point out to you, with agriculture and being the leader in this industry, our agency believes in delivering the climate smart solution, voluntary, incentive-based, and market-driven approaches. That is the key to the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. The voluntary approach is something the agency's always had at the forefront. Incentive-based opportunities, we provided those as well. But these partnerships also look at the incentive base, but the goal is to be able to have those products reach a different market or expand the market footprint that we currently have. Next slide. To get to accomplish the mission with the commodities opportunities, like I say, we're building and expanding markets, whether it's pilot projects or utilizing some of the conservation practices that the agency currently utilizes. A lot of opportunity here for partners to either develop new programs, utilize existing practices to restructure a particular program, but fully engaged and delivered by the conservation partners. Build wealth, stay in rural communities. That's part of that initiative to increase the competitive edge for U.S. agriculture. The last bullet here, how do we do this? How do we get this accomplished? It's still our American farmers and ranchers, voluntary efforts. These groups are uniquely positioned to deliver these solutions because all of it ties back to soil and water, plants, animals, the resource concerns we're looking to protect and enhance annually through our other conservation programs. We have the opportunity here through these partnerships to actually provide an additional opportunity for those who are working in landscape force. Next slide. Now, September, just some background here. In September, Secretary Bill Sack announced how much we were investing, up to $2.8 billion. We had 70 projects selected. and these projects will actually be leveraging. So the 2.8 billion that it comes from USDA, there's another 2.8 billion or more that will be coming from those partners to expand that. And initially there was $1 billion set aside, but partners came to the forefront and said, we can help you get this done. But here's where we are. Now, we have about $3 billion here. The request was way more, and you can see that. 450 proposals, 350 groups, 5 million to 100 million. So you can almost imagine the amount of requests we received and the total dollar figure. But with these proposals, you're looking at nonprofits, for-profits, governments, cooperatives, small businesses, and then you're looking at every state being included in some of these proposals. I think the most states it would touch would be 22. So we do have a lot of those proposals that will be operating in multiple states. Next slide. 70 selected projects providing technical financial assistance. Some of these are going to pilot innovative and cost-effective measures. Quantifying, monitoring, as we talked earlier about the greenhouse gases, the development and promotion of new market opportunities. Still, for those who are working the landscape, this is a great opportunity to allow your products to be to reach a new market. And as we develop new markets, we're already at the forefront of having those products meeting the requirements of climate smart, climate friendly. So again, it places the U.S. in a great position to be at the forefront of a lot of market opportunities. Next slide. Now, outcomes. What are we anticipating out of these projects? What will be delivered? As you can see here, expanding markets, 50,000 farms reached, 250 million acres. This expands on what we're currently doing with Farm Bill program, with IRA, and still another program, this partnership program allows us to reach even more producers and touch more acres. The measurement of the number of tons of carbon dioxide, carbon sequestration, those opportunities, but also the research that will be done by the universities and other partnering agencies there. And I mentioned earlier the leveraging, what we can do when we have more people fully engaged. Next slide. Now, sum it up. Simply put, IRA provides additional funding in federal conservation programs. Reach more, protect more, provide more. One of the things we've asked for over the years, now we have the opportunity with IRA funding. It is a workload. So even within the IRA and our Farm Bill programs, we do have partnership efforts there. Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities just provides opportunities for the ag industry. Leveraging those investments, creating and being able to take advantage of marketing opportunities for our commodities here in the U.S. But still, landscape effort, grassroots effort, still working with the same group of landowners, producers, farmers, ranchers. And how do we do it? Again, just mentioned that. Producers, landowners, partners, ranchers, going to be key in delivering voluntary conservation, climate smart measures, never wanting to get into the area of regulation. So, but everything we do, guys, keeping all of our natural resources productive, but keeping the U.S. agriculture industry is one of those world leaders. Next slide. I will speak to this. We got this. This is something that they've been adding to slides because of Chief Cosby is always being asked by the secretary, undersecretary, you've got a lot on your plate. You've got a lot to deliver. You've got multiple programs, partnerships. And the chief's response is that we've got this. We've got enough hands on deck that we can get this accomplished in that time frame. So a lot of work ahead of us. And I know you're as a partnership, you guys are fully engaged in helping us deliver upon this mission. But if there's anything that we can do to help on that landscape, we need to work together. So we can definitely share the information. I'll be around. So if you have any questions about any of these programs, I should definitely be able to answer those for you. Thank you.
Brian, we're not hearing you. It looked like you were talking.
Unmute there too. Sorry about that. I got two different devices. We'll move to Ellen and the Water Infrastructure and Resilience Finance Center. Take it away, Ellen.
Thank you so much. And I'll just kick it off immediately and say I don't have access either to move the slides. So so we'll request that assistance for the slides. And I'm Ellen Tarquinio. I'm the director for the Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center here at EPA. And you're just really glad to be here and part of this conversation, and also to go last because I get to build on all of the great information and all of the resources that you've been hearing up to this point during the webinar. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about really is building on the stuff that you heard from Allison, from Joseph, from Sean, and really talking about how we can provide support and assistance to communities, to anyone like yourself who are looking for just project support and help to access some of the federal funding that's out there. So if you go to the next slide. Great. So the overall belief and mission statement that we have for all of the technical assistance work in the Office of Water at EPA is really based on this fundamental belief that all communities deserve access to clean, safe, and reliable water. And that's really what we're all gearing towards and working towards. That underserved, disadvantaged communities, communities that haven't been able to access the state revolving fund, all of those really great programs that Allison kicked off this whole webinar with. We really want to just sort of reduce the challenges, the understanding that's need to be had inherently in a community to help communities really build that pipeline of quality SRF projects and really focus on the disadvantaged and underserved communities who haven't accessed federal funding before. To do all of this, we're working through technical assistance providers, like you just heard from Sean. A lot of the work we're funding them to do to go out and to help communities. We're partnering with states to help build the state efforts and build them into part of this conversation. So it's all really just geared up to making sure communities are set up well with the understanding, with just a basic overall perspective of what are the funding sources that are out there, and have people that can help them along the way to actually access that funding. Next slide. The Water TA program, and that covers really a whole bunch of different individual programs that we've got here at the agency, but they all fall under this umbrella. That water technical assistance is identifying problems, planning for solutions that meet those specific community needs, that every plan is built on what's appropriate and what's specific for that community, that there's engagement throughout the process, that we're building up that TMF, that technical, managerial, and financial capacity across systems, and really working towards develop applications for that SRF funding, for some of the other federal fundings like you heard from Joseph. Just an overall approach to access funding across the board. Again, just tying all of these different presentations together, really all the conversations. I've never seen a community in all the work that I've done come in and really just have a sole source of funding. So we look across those programs and look to, is some of the programs from NRCS applicable here? Can that be a match or a leverage for some of the SRF program? Could it fund parts of a project and other parts? So they all the technical assistance providers we have walk through communities through that process, thinking about that, looking at what's this whole range of solutions that might be appropriate for them. Get on the next slide. I don't know if you guys are having this delay too. I mentioned that there's a number of different programs. There's a number of different initiatives. So if you're out there in the community, you've heard about one program or another, We really have made a big concerted effort over the past year to try to bring all of these different technical assistance programs together at EPA. Think about them under one umbrella, which is this Water TA initiative. Even though we know some of these programs have different aspects, we are really have made this concerted effort and have got them sort of under this full umbrella of Water TA. A lot of that's funded through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So I'll talk a little bit more about the environmental finance centers, which Quantified Ventures is one of the subs for that, and providing a lot of that TA work through. And it's really all geared towards the SRF program and all of those different projects that Allison talked about, all of the different ways that people can think a little bit creatively of how they can access SRF funding. These TA providers can help you think through that, talk about it, look at what are some of the options for you, and really help you apply for that work. Go to the next slide. I'm going through these pretty quick because I want to make sure there's a lot of good time for questions.
I'm changing these slides really quickly, so sorry about the delay.
Oh, it's okay. I just want to make sure the slides catch up with it. There's a number of different things that the TA providers can do to help communities think through some of those projects and just even some aspects of the project. We know there's a range of different services that people need. If you're a community out there, if you know a community that needs help, just even identifying the project, looking at that full scope, the TA providers can help with that full range of services. Or they can just help with a really specific thing. Maybe there's just some financial planning that's needed. Maybe there's just looking at some of the project design, or just even looking at the inventory for lead service line replacement. Or, for this group, just looking at some of that plan development and coordination. If you're thinking about these broad non-point source issues, or even some stormwater green infrastructure aspects that could be built into your overall watershed planning, TA providers can help with that. And there's, over $100 million of funding we have through the EFCs. There is about $200 million more funding that we've just recently released, and we're going to have just a huge, significant amount more funding coming out the door in the next couple months that I'll just preview that it's on the way, and really it's going to lend a lot of support and lend a lot of capacity to the engineering aspects, which are needed for a lot of these projects to go forward. If you go to the next slide. So one of the first questions, I know if I was on the other side of this webinar, I'd be like, well, how do I get the support? How can I find out more information? How can I get just more detail about what's out there and who these providers are? This web form, which you can get at by epa.gov/waterTA, pretty simple. You just go on here, you fill out information, the name, contact information, a little bit about the kind of help that you're looking for, and you'll get contacted by EPA to talk about what kind of project you're thinking about, who's the right technical assistance provider for you. And then you'll be connected with that technical assistance provider. So it's a pretty easy form to fill out. It takes less than 5 minutes, so it should be a pretty low burden. And we want to make sure that, we're connecting people in as easy a way possible to a technical assistance provider that can help you out. So if you want to take note of that, just nothing else you take away from this talk is just go to epa.gov/waterTA, fill out this less than 5 minute to fill out form, and ask for help. And someone will be in contact with you about the kind of program you're looking for, the kind of support you might need, and connect you with one of those TA providers. If you go to the next slide. Great. So the environmental finance centers, these are the largest water TA provider that we have here at EPA, and they can cover a lot of different challenges and project types that communities are facing to try to access the state revolving fund programs that Allison really just did a great job presenting some of the eligible types of projects and things people can be thinking about. If you go to the next slide. The EFCs, I'll say, are spread throughout the country. They're a TA provider that we've had in place for 31 years at this point. So they've been around for a long time, but thanks to funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, we supersize them. We now have $100 million in funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law and $52 million in additional capacity. And that additional $52 million can go to projects that aren't tied as closely to the SRF. So there's a lot of different things that these folks can do to help communities access SRF funding. If you go to the next slide. So one of the questions is definitely like, where are people? How can I get help? And where are they? We have an approach for the EFCs. This is, a map of the different providers that are out there that are funded through the environmental finance centers. They're spread throughout the country. We've got regional technical assistance providers. So you can see here, there's a couple of folks up there in the Mississippi River Basin that can provide support and assistance. If you go to the next slide. We've also got a number of different providers. We wanted to have regional providers, and then knowing that there's going to be a lot of communities coming in for assistance, we also have some national providers that can step in and provide some really specific help and help communities with different needs that they have. And so these are the national providers that can work across the entire U.S. And each one of these, if you go to the next slide, has different subcontractors and subgrantees. So even if they've got folks like Wichita State is right there in the middle of the country, they've got a whole bunch of different subs in each one of the different states, and same for all of the different providers. There's a lot of different people who are working with folks, and you've actually heard from one of them earlier today. There's a lot of different services that they can provide. Regionally, there's just some really specific options. These can be provided by the nationals as well. But just to highlight, one of the reasons we've got sort of two levels of support is the regions can get in there, provide some really direct local knowledge, and the national providers can come in and really assist and work in partnership with those regional providers to get into some detail about what help do they need. Can we talk about some maybe broader thinking, holistic approaches? Can we bring in some expertise at a larger level? So the regional and the national providers are really working hand in hand to help communities where they can to provide a full range of different support options. Go to the next slide.
3 minutes left.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, go to the next slide. Great. And again, just to highlight again that the epa.gov/water/TA is a really great place for you to go to find out more information about these technical assistance providers, more information about the types of services and support that they can provide and help you all with. And to go in and find that form to actually request assistance. Pretty, again, easy process. And then the second link there is actually for the Water Finance Center. So in addition to, I'm just going to make a plug for a lot of the other work that the center does. In addition to that water TA work that we lead and fund for all those different technical assistance providers, we also have a lot of other work that we do to try to make funding and financing options easier and more understandable for communities. There's a large clearinghouse of water finance information. There's learning modules. We're going to be soon releasing a learning module on agricultural and municipal partnerships to meet permit requirements and different alternative funding approaches. There's a whole bunch of information on there. So if you have some spare time that you want to look at different resources, some innovative funding approaches, feel free to please go to that center's page and just take a look and reach out at any point if there's some things that you think that you'd like to work with us on. We're always open for more partnerships, more ideas, and building more tools that'll be helpful for people who are actually out implementing this work. That's it. Thank you.
So much, Ellen, that was great. And a big thanks to all the presenters for really packaging tremendous amounts of information in a short period of time. And thanks to all of the people who've joined here that listened and learned and jotted down some questions. We'll open it up for questions now. I'll have to figure out how I can keep track of where I'm seeing you guys. Let's go ahead and open it up. Jeanette Marsh, you had a question for Jerry Rayner about how the funds were being distributed through state offices. Would you like to give voice to that to start with?
Let's see if I can do that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that presentation focused on national dollars, and I was wondering if some of that work is being done in headquarters, or is it all going out to state offices, or is there some distribution mechanism through the local offices in the state? Exactly how is that decision being made?
Yes, there's a portion of that that resides here in the headquarters and I'll speak to FY23, which would move forward in the other years. With ASEP, we have a design, a delivery, and ASEP is our easement program. We delivered all of that from the national level, with the state meeting the parameters of the program. So we were able to then allocate those funds to particular projects. For our other conservation programs, we do have a structure for allocating funds to the states. So we did deliver state allocations, and 90% of that funding went directly to the state, whether it was to support operations but the majority of that funding was delivered for meeting the conservation needs, dollars going into the hands of the producers. So the big bulk of our IRA funding is directly provided to the states through our allocation process.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Jeanette. If anyone else has a question, just go ahead and unmute and ask it of one of the presenters. It's going to be easier than having hands up at this point. So who's got a question for one of the presenters?
I do. This is Michelle Perez with American Farmland Trust.
Excellent, Michelle. Thank you.
I really enjoyed today. It was a nice review of all the major funding sources that I haven't thought about in a long time. And I guess I probably had too many questions here, but I'll start. Like, I was just wondering, who else is on the call? I represent a farm-oriented organization, and we try to work at the watershed level. We try to work in EPA 319 projects, our CPP projects, and I was trying to grasp all these other funding sources. It was very helpful to hear what some of them do pay for practices, some of them pay for planning. So I think more details on that would be helpful, perhaps from the latter speaker. Like, is there funding for farm conservation oriented work from that final speaker? I guess I've come to one question. And then the other question was for Jerry Rayner. You've got the biggest, pots in town in terms of the funding sources for farm conservation projects. I'm wondering to what extent, all the staff, the district conservationists, are probably very stressed trying to get all this huge new amounts of funding out the door to farmers. To what extent is NRCS trying to work with the watershed groups and potentially the community that the Quantified Ventures speaker was talking to, and see them as a partner to help you get the funds out the door. So I'm just wondering about that marrying of technical resources to get the funds out, but also working at the watershed level and having these conservation funds for farmers directed towards the impaired water body projects or the source water protection projects, and really, creating landscape scale change with, otherwise farm scale programs. I hope that was understandable. That was a lot, and there may be technical difficulties with sound.
No problem. We got you, Michelle. So Jerry, why don't you take a minute and respond to Michelle, and then Ellen, maybe you can pick up a little bit of the questions she threw toward you. Jerry.
All right. Yes, Michelle, all of the above. How can I group them together that way? If you think about the programs that we deliver, our conservation partnership program is one of those opportunities for partners to deliver and assist us in delivering and getting those dollars out to producers. Still, we're all utilizing the same conservation practices. Some of those may be innovative, but there's opportunities there for partners to structure programs, again, to meet the producers where they are, to assist us with getting additional conservation work completed. Landscape level, Mississippi River Basin Initiative, Great Lakes Initiative, we have landscape initiatives that are also taking advantage of these dollars. But again, when we are making our broad announcements of funding opportunities, we're looking at proposals that partners are providing to us to say, here's what we can do. Now, we have worked with some partners to say that here's some opportunities. Even down at in the state level, my previous position, I was a state conservationist in Indiana. We had our own announcements for funding to help with the delivery of conservation. So those efforts are ongoing. We may not be reaching every single partner, whether we're talking source water, that is an included part of our conservation program. Some states are even screening or providing, when we're ranking applications, providing higher ranking points if we're working in areas to protect source water. So all of those things are included, just in different fashions and different measures. But when it comes to the landscape initiatives and working through partners, that's what those opportunities are for, to not only existing partnerships that we're looking to continue to do work with, but any new partners that are on the landscape that are saying, here's something that we can provide to benefit the conservation programs, benefit the environment, but it's going to be a direct connection to the landowners and the producers of getting conservation on the ground. I hope I didn't muddy the water too much for you.
Looks good. And Ellen, I think Michelle was also asking if your office, those water technical assistance folks, can be in service of agricultural producers or people who are interested in putting things into farmland environments. Any response to that?
It's a really great question. There's definitely some of the programs in Water TA. So, I encourage folks to sort of go to the site, look at some of those different resources. And importantly, and maybe this is like the phone a friend aspect of Allison's still on to talk a little bit about like the link deposit program and where farmers can sort of tap into some of the SRF resources where applicable and where it's eligible in that state program. But a lot of the funding that we're providing out there is for projects that can access SRF funding. And in some states, there's, different creative mechanisms, I'll say, that states have taken to get money to farmers to address non-point source issues that are affecting water quality, that aren't just working again with the municipality. In some cases, that's partnerships between farmers and the local utilities themselves and the municipalities. And that's certainly something we encourage and want to fund and even have more examples of. So if there's that kind of thinking from some of the farmers who could come in and really work with the utilities there, if they come in together, that's great. We would want to provide that technical assistance to help think creatively about how to get money out there to address non-point source issues to help meet some of those permit requirements. And then there's some great information that I think Allison keyed up in the beginning of her presentation about some of the creative non-point source funding options that the SRF has thought through, the link deposit program and some of the resources that I think got dropped into the chat that I would just encourage folks to look at and see if that makes sense for maybe some of the farmers or some of the watershed groups to think about and come in and request funding.
Thanks, Ellen. Appreciate that. Thanks, Michelle, for the question. I'm going to apologize to everybody. We're going to spill over that 2:45 adjournment threshold by 5 to 7 minutes. So I hope you all can hang with us. An element that Michelle asked was who else is on the call. At one point, we had 77 other folks on the line. So this has been a very robustly attended webinar. So really appreciate the time and energy people have brought to come and learn some more about it. Do we have another question for one of the presenters from one of the participants?
Brian, I do. I guess just for Ellen, excuse me. I was just wondering how well the TA services are utilized, just if you have a grasp of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll say up until this point, you know, we've had these EFCs up for a really long time, and they've been fully utilized, where we're even getting money from other programs and just trying to get them more funding to work with more communities. We are now at the point where we have just kicked off the environmental finance centers with this historic level of bill funding. And so they are about 2 months for some of them, just started up, and they're beginning to work with communities. And they're beginning to sort of take on those communities. So it's the first time they've had this much money and this much capacity to help people. We're usually scrounging for funds to get them fully, to get more and more communities on board. So maybe this is even a request. We've got, you know, capacity to help over 500 communities per year. And so if you're thinking about a project, if you've got something that you've maybe had in the back of your mind for a long time, of like, wow, if we only had someone help us design this, think through it, look at the financing, send it in, because we've got, you know, again, over 500 communities per year, which is just leaps and bounds about what we've been able to fund in the past. Before we've been fully utilized, this time it's just a capacity and a ceiling that's huge. So come in with projects.
So we have a question from Margaret Wagner. Margaret, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, thank you for the
Great.
presentations. Thank you for the information. Hopefully I'm coming through okay on sound.
Yes, you're doing
Yep.
good.
Great. So my question, maybe, Ellen, goes to your last point that sometimes the best projects could just be discussed with individuals, and then there could be feedback to help us tailor those. But wondering if any of the presenters have any experience applying this type of funding towards working with private well owners. I saw some funding would be available for monitoring, but specifically I'm wondering, as we think about responding to some non-point source impacts and maybe elevated nitrate in private drinking water wells, have you seen any proposals that would be able to respond to that, bring both loan dollars to help either remediate the problem or replace wells? And then the second piece of that is, if the program was designed to address low-income households, is that the type of projects that might get the forgiveness, the loan forgiveness for a type of SRF type funding, if those people qualify under different programs meeting a certain economic threshold?
Two good questions from Margaret. Anybody dealing with well issues, and then low-income fund forgiveness, grant forgiveness? Thoughts from presenters?
I can try my hand at this. I think the well issue would be something that you would bring up with your drinking water state revolving fund. With these bill appropriations, there is $1 billion at least for the clean water, and I forget the amount for the drinking water state revolving fund, to address emerging contaminants. And there's been some projects where PFAS or another emerging contaminant are already found to be somewhere, and then that money can then go towards addressing that. But again, it depends on where the state priority is and the projects that they're selecting for those different funds.
Okay, so
thank you, Allison.
Just so I understand, then we'd have to align internally with the state. So in that case, it would be the Department of Health, and then we would see if that priority aligns with their priority, and then actually work through that recipient of those federal grants to move ideas or projects forward.
Mm-hmm. So
okay,
at the state level, it would be whoever houses. I would speak to wherever the SRFs are. Drinking water might be in Department of Health, and then clean water might be in like ecology or something. But you would want to get them both at the table to see what's going on, and maybe like 319 as well, since they do some grants to facilitate some more like capacity for these types of things sometimes.
thank you. Thanks, Allison.
If that helps, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Margaret. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to shift, I think, and bring this wonderful opportunity to a close, but we want to hear first from Lauren Salvato a little bit about the upcoming October in-person workshop. Lauren?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. We're excited about our upcoming October workshop. This has been possible with some grant funding through EPA Office of Water. And so our workshop is in St. Paul. Our theme is leverage points of change, or places within a complex system where a small change in one thing can produce big changes in everything. And our 1.5-day workshop is organized around categories of leverage points, including policy, technical, financial, leadership, and partnerships. An example, a financial one would be the batch and build model from Iowa, or a farmer project-driven grant program. Another component we have of the workshop is the tribal and BIPOC panel. So making space to hear from voices about their challenges associated with implementing conservation on ag lands. And the workshop is by invite only, but certainly it's not meant to be exclusive. So just reach out to me if you're interested in attending. We just sort of needed to not make it a wild, wild west in terms of numbers to expect. So still time to sort of commit to coming to that. And that's really all I have there, Brian.
Lauren, let me, on behalf of the team, thank everybody who came to participate in the workshop. And again, kudos to all the presenters for being able to package their important information in such a small bit of time, and for excellent presentations. Thank you, Lauren, for organizing the format. I'll turn to you, Lauren, or Kirsten, for any final thoughts you might have before we close it out.
I'm good. Kirsten?
Thank you, Lauren.
As well, I don't know if you can hear me or not anymore.
Yes, you're good.
I can now.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you everyone for being on here. Great day. Looking forward to seeing you in October. Thank you, Brian, Lauren, and Aaron from our team.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Have a great day and a great autumn. Next season has come upon us, so let's enjoy it. Thank you all. Stay safe.